Hey guys, Dr. Bodle here, and in this week's video, we're going to talk about natural ways that we can understand and support conversion of T4 into T3. Now, we've talked before about how some people may benefit by bypassing this conversion step and adding some sort of T3 medication to their regimen. And if that's a topic that you're interested in, I'll link it for you in the cards above. But if you don't want to add more medication and you're looking to go more of the natural route, then today's video is definitely for you. But I hope that you find the information enjoyable. And after 9+ years of working with thousands of patients using these natural strategies to help people improve their Hashimoto's and hypothyroid symptoms, I think you will find today's content useful for you. And if you want to learn more about topics just like today, then make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for new videos every Thursday. So the first way that we can naturally support our T4 to T3 conversion isn't really natural, but it requires a natural or holistic mindset. And that is the assessment of other medications that we might be taking. Unfortunately, it happens way more than I'd like to see, but I'll often have patients coming into my clinic and trying to manage one symptom or another, and what they don't realize is those symptoms are actually side effects from other medications that they're taking. As I love to point out, any strategy that we're going to use is going to have its pros and cons, and we always want to understand those, weigh those, and make sure that the pros outweigh those cons. But if we decide to go in a particular direction because there's a number of benefits associated with a strategy, that's great, but we shouldn't forget about the drawbacks as well. And anytime you're working with your doctor to help you manage either multiple medications or multiple supplements, you want to make sure that you're aware of all the effects and the interactions. When we look at the research, there are some known medications that can decrease the peripheral conversion of T4 into T3, some of which are even used in situations where people are having a hyperthyroid storm, and these medications can help them to manage some of those symptoms. But what I found is, yes, those medications are used in those very particular situations, but outside of that particular context or scope, sometimes I feel like people can forget that it can have an impact on the efficiency of our thyroid pathway if that isn't the main focus of our therapy. So some of those medications are going to be a little bit more obvious, and you're probably not going to be taking them unless you're having a Graves' flare-up or a hyperthyroid situation. For example, propylthiouracil is a medication that inhibits TPO activity, and therefore it can decrease the amount of T4 that your thyroid gland is making, but it also impairs the conversion of T4 into T3. More commonly these days, people are put on the medication methimazole, which also inhibits TPO activity, but doesn't seem to have the same effect on the conversion process. Again, these likely aren't medications that you're taking if you're dealing with Hashimoto's, but Graves is an autoimmune thyroid condition too. And some people will take these medications for the long term to manage and avoid any of those flare-ups. It's good to avoid chronic hyperthyroidism, but if we take someone who's in a hyperthyroid state, provide them with medication, and then put them into more of a hypothyroid state, if they're struggling with symptoms, then we want to be aware of every part of that thyroid pathway that medication is impacting. Other medications that can also limit T4 to T3 conversion include things like amiodarone, which is for heart arrhythmias, dexamethasone, which is a steroid, but the big ones that I often see in practice that can have an impact on this part of our physiology, but that connection isn't always made, includes corticosteroids and also beta blockers. Now keep in mind that all medication is going to interact with your own individual physiology in a slightly unique way. And just because you're taking one of these medications doesn't necessarily mean that it's having a negative impact on your thyroid health. There's debate about how long-lasting some of these effects can be, and whether or not some of the animal studies translates well to human physiology. But when I look at the evidence and the way that some doctors are utilizing these medications, we know that these medications can be helpful in the management of hyperthyroidism and thyroid storms. And if they're effective in some of those, kind of more extreme situations, then I think we should be aware that it could have that effect, even if we're just using something like propranolol to manage someone's blood pressure and we're not thinking about their thyroid. Generally speaking, the thing that helps me with these types of assessments is looking at the timing in the patient's history. If we were relatively stable with whatever treatments or support strategies we were using for our thyroid, and then we added in some additional medications, especially ones in these types of categories, and we saw a decline in function or a change in how you felt, then that would be a little yellow flag to me to say, hey, something's different here, and maybe this new medication is interacting with our physiology in a way that isn't helpful to us. On top of that, our free T3 range typically ranges from about 2 to 4.4 picograms per milliliter. While I've said before that optimal or functional ranges are not diagnostic, they give us more of a reference point where we can start to see trends if things are going a little bit too high or a little bit too low. I'm typically looking for our free T3 to be somewhere around 2.8 or 2.9 to 4 as more of an optimal window. If we start to get below that lower optimal edge, it doesn't mean that you have a disease or that anything is necessarily wrong, but we should start wondering if that might not be the best result for you, and then look at these other areas that we know can affect our conversion. The next area that can play a role in thyroid hormone conversion is nutrient deficiencies. Now, the enzymes that help to facilitate conversion are called deiodinases, and they're selenium-based enzymes that also require cofactors like zinc to do their job properly. It's for this reason that you'll see a lot of supplement products out there that have some sort of, thyroid conversion worked into the name. And when you look at the ingredients, you'll notice that they often include many of these compounds. Additionally, there is some research that suggests that taking selenium might not only help out with thyroid hormone conversion, but it could potentially help to lower thyroid antibodies. And obviously, for people with Hashimoto's, who often struggle in both of these areas, that sounds like a win-win to me. However, even with all these potential benefits, this is not an area that I focus on in my practice. I know that some people have had some good success when it comes to selenium supplementation. And years ago, when I was in my earlier stages of practice, because of the benefits that selenium supplementation could provide, and because there were very few drawbacks, it was definitely something that I was including much more frequently. But after looking at the results and getting feedback from many patients, it seemed to me that taking selenium wasn't providing the same type of expected benefit that we were hoping to see. And in a world where it's easy to start taking a million different things, I always want to make sure that we're being targeted and we're choosing things that have the most effect. When it came down to it, and when it came to thyroid conversion, selenium, zinc, and these thyroid conversion supplements, while they likely weren't necessarily harmful, just didn't make the cut. But if you're interested, you've done your research, and you think that some of this nutrient support could be helpful for you, then taking 200 micrograms of selenium per day for about 3 to 6 months, or taking 25 milligrams of zinc during that same time span, both could be reasonable, and like I said before, likely have few negative consequences and won't cause you any harm. Finally, the last and the biggest way that you can affect natural thyroid conversion is through the effective management of inflammation. The enzymes that help us turn T4 into T3 are very sensitive to inflammation. And when we have an increase in our inflammatory load, the effectiveness of those enzymes becomes compromised. Sometimes patients will ask, what exactly is inflammation? And it can be a bit of a hard concept to wrap our minds around. Essentially, inflammation is the way that our body and our immune system responds to any type of injury. That injury can be something physical, like in the case of a sprained ankle or a broken bone. It can be in response to something chemical, and it can be due to maladaptive physiological activity, whether that's something like autoimmunity, insulin resistance, nutrient depletions, and shifts in hormones, just to name a few. Sometimes we can identify inflammation by looking at our labs, especially if that inflammation is more chronic and more severe. I like to look at markers like C-reactive protein, homocysteine, fibrinogen, ferritin, and uric acid, all of which may be elevated when inflammation is present. The other thing that can tip me off is low vitamin D levels, especially if someone is resistant to vitamin D supplementation. So if you've been taking a ton of vitamin D, but your levels still aren't budging, it could be due to the fact that the supplement you're taking isn't very good, but it also could be due to the fact that you're not managing the inflammation and therefore the levels aren't responding. However, It's possible to have inflammation and not see changes in any of those markers that I just mentioned. There are inflammatory proteins that are more transient or can't be necessarily checked on our standard labs, and therefore, just because we're getting an expanded panel done doesn't mean that the inflammation is going to be completely obvious. In these situations, what I do with my patients is we work together to try to identify systemic symptoms that are reflective of any potential inflammation that they might have. This could include neurological symptoms like depression, brain fog, and memory issues. We could also have gut issues like chronic bloating and indigestion. We might notice an increase in pain and achiness that is generalized and not associated with any previous injuries. Changes in skin health and rashes could also be a sign of systemic inflammation. You might notice a significant increase in fatigue or decreased endurance. And finally, some people notice rapid changes in weight. The key here is that when it comes to inflammation associated with a thyroid condition, and I said it a couple times before, but the symptoms tend to be more generalized and more systemic, rather than located in one particular area of the body. This is because those inflammatory cytokines and proteins are circulating everywhere. And therefore, once that initial damage and irritation occurs, we can then have downstream effects that are much more global in nature. But if you've determined that you have inflammation by looking at your labs and assessing your signs and symptoms, then the next question is, what's next? And really, although it is important to identify if you have inflammation, the real key is understanding what is driving it. Just like many of the other topics that we talk about in regards to thyroid, if we can't understand the root cause, then we can't be specific in the actions that we take to help remedy it. When I'm working with people who have thyroid conditions and Hashimoto's, there's a few areas that can contribute to inflammation that I like to look at first that really help me to assess the patient as a whole. This includes things like, does the patient have any food sensitivities or are they reacting to foods in general? Do they have any gut issues where they're not breaking down their food? Or do they have any types of dysbiosis? Are they getting regular, consistent sleep? Are they being exposed to any types of environmental toxins, either in their own home or in the workspace? Do they have any changes in glucose regulation, either hypoglycemia or elevated levels of glucose, such as in the cases of metabolic dysfunction, insulin resistance, prediabetes, and diabetes? Do they have any acute or chronic infections? Do they have imbalances in their sex hormones? And finally, how are they managing their emotional stress? Now, that's not a comprehensive list, but it's a good place to start, and it's enough information to get you thinking about different aspects of your health, and at the very least, be aware that these things can contribute to inflammation and that we shouldn't be disregarding them, especially if any of these areas are symptomatic. But on top of just knowing what the possibilities are, this is where we also want to be able to use our labs and do a good job at tracking our symptoms. Abnormal labs can hint and point us in the right direction, but tracking and journaling when you feel better and when you feel worse can be one of the most helpful things that you do. Some people might notice that they get tired and foggy after they eat a meal. Others might notice an increase in joint pain when they eat a specific type of food. Some people might feel more depressed when they have 3 days in a row where their sleep is inconsistent. Someone else might feel more depressed in the week prior to their period. And finally, another person might notice that in general, they can tolerate most foods that they eat, but when their stress levels are really high, they become more bloated and they seem to react to everything. In each of these scenarios, we want to look at the potential trigger, keep track of what our response is, and then see if we can develop any patterns that gives us more of an indication that whatever that stimulus is causing some of our problems. From there, we can then work to put in supports that helps us to manage that issue from the root cause, which would help us to maximally affect change and have those changes be long lasting. In my practice, if we identify that inflammation is the big inhibitor of that T4 to T3 conversion, then I also might use some natural compounds to help manage the inflammation in the short term. This could include things like curcumin, resveratrol, glutathione, omega-3 fatty acids, or CoQ10. There's a lot of options out there, and one isn't necessarily more right than another. We always want to make sure that it's something that is well tolerated for you, and when I'm choosing things, If I can pick something that addresses multiple areas of need for one person at one time, then I'm definitely going to try to leverage that. That way we can reduce some of the complexity and make it easier on the patient. But as I've said before, both supplements and medication can end up being pretty ineffective if we're just trying to use them to manage symptoms and we're not working on the cause at the same time. So in all, yes, supporting conversion can be tough, but it's an important part of our thyroid pathway and should be assessed and addressed if necessary. Thyroid hormone drives our cellular metabolism, but it's not able to do that unless we can convert that T4 into T3. But as always, let me know what you think and feel free to ask any questions in the comments below. Is thyroid conversion something that you've been talking to your doctor about and working on? And what has been the most effective approach for you? I'm looking forward to hearing about some of your strategies and getting your feedback. If you like this video but need more help and support, then I'd recommend getting in touch with me and my staff about my upcoming course. The course will include 8 weeks of live taught modules and live question and answer support sessions. In the course, my goal is to help women with Hashimoto's who aren't getting support from their doctor, want to make changes but don't know where to start, go from feeling tired, exhausted, and discouraged to making nutrition, lifestyle, and supplement choices with confidence, which helps them feel strong, vibrant, and allow them to love their lives again. If that's something that sounds interesting to you, send an email to contact@seattlethyroidhelp.com with the word course in the subject line. If you'd rather do some more learning on your own right now, make sure to check out some of the other videos and playlists right here on my YouTube channel. Follow me on Instagram or Facebook for daily information and tips. And you can also grab either one of my free downloads, which are listed in the description box below. But that's it for this week. I love you guys. Take care of yourself. I hope you're doing well. Reach out if there's anything you need. And if you liked the video, please help me by supporting the channel by giving it a thumbs up and subscribing if you haven't done so. But my name is Dr. Bodle. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I will see you in the next one.